Welcome back. This is a fifth note in the series that we are covering on how to import data into ServiceNow. And we are at the point where we're ready to test our import. So if you've been following along in the series, you'll remember at the beginning that we talked about how a ServiceNow import involves loading data from some source table, source entity that is outside of ServiceNow. And we want to get that data loaded into a target entity or table that exists within ServiceNow. We talked initially about how ServiceNow, the import process that ServiceNow uses, introduces a table between those two steps called an import set table that's used to help map the data from a UI perspective, and then it also increases the performance of the import. We've gone through the steps so far of creating our data source, telling ServiceNow where that entity is, what type of entity it is, and what data we want to pull. We've tested the data source to ensure that the connection was successful and that we were able to load the desired data into our staging table. And then we've gone and created our transform map and field maps to establish how we want the data to be moved from the staging table into the final destination target table within ServiceNow. At that point, with those tasks complete, we're ready to test our import. Before we actually run the import, I wanted to refresh your memory on our source and our target, just to show you what we're loading from and where we're loading to. I'm going to do that by first going into our data source, this data source.list. That's the table that ServiceNow stores data sources in. We have one, which we've created called test import. And wanted to refresh your memory that this indeed pulls from a CSV or an Excel file that we've attached here. And if you want to see what that data includes, it's a simple spreadsheet I created with 5 columns, name, address, city, state, zip, and 5 rows of sample data. So that is our source. And then quickly to review, I created a custom table in ServiceNow that we'll use as our target table. Want to mention that the target table for an import can be any table. It can be, as long as you have access to it, but it can be any ServiceNow table. That includes out-of-the-box tables. It could be the user table. It could be some department table or a location table. It could be a CMDB table out of the box, or it could be a custom table that you've created for your own purposes, and that's what I've done in the case of this demonstration. The name of that table that I created was my table. The actual database table name is u_my_table. I'm going to do a .list on that to see what records there are, and you can see there are no records there. So our table is clean, it's empty, it's ready to accept data from an import. So let's run our first import. Everything starts with the data source. So I'm going to go back to our data source. So sys_data_source.list. Show the records there. We can see we've created one and only one. It's called test import, pulling from that Excel file. I'm going to open that up again. You'll see once we're here now again, I'm going to scroll down a bit and look for the related links section. And there are 2 options here to load data into our staging table. I just learned this morning that there's a difference between these two, other than the amount of rows that are loaded. Test load 20 records is used only to validate your connection to your data source or your source entity, and also then to ensure that the data that you're pulling is correct. You can't do a test load 20 records and then actually run a transform on it and load those into the target. That's the big difference that I wasn't aware of. So what we're going to do now, because we've already tested our records and we saw that our connection works and our staging table loads the data that we desire, we're going to do load all records. So that's what you're going to want to do if you're actually going to want to run the transform, the field maps, and actually see that the data moves into the target. So I'm going to click on load all records. ServiceNow connects to the source. It pulls the data. And it gives us a status back that the state of the process is complete and that the completion code is successful. So excellent. We've got our data loaded into our staging table at this point. You can see that it's told us it's processed 5 records and it resulted in 5 inserts, which is exactly what we'd hoped to see. If you get to this point in the process and you have a problem here and you're getting some other, maybe an error or some other indication that something's gone wrong, I would recommend going back, reviewing the notes that we've discussed prior to this. If you can't get it, feel free to send me an email. I'm at jeff@jtt0340.com, and I will try and help figure out maybe what has happened. So at this point, we're ready to continue, and we're ready to run our transform map and its associated field maps to actually move the data into our target. So you can do that right from this screen. Look down here for the run transform. Transform the loaded import set using an existing transform map, which is what we want to do. So I'm going to click Run Transform. ServiceNow is going to ask us to validate a couple of things. First of all, what import set do you want to use? And it's populated here, the one that we just created, the import poll that we just did. So import set 1001045 is the number it gave that one. And then it's going to ask us to validate what transform map are we using. Again, we only have one, so it defaults that in the selected maps run in order box, and we're ready to transform. So I'm going to click the transform button, and ServiceNow then goes to the staging table, pulls the data according to, and moves the data according to our transform map and its associated field maps that we created in the last step. At this point, congratulations, you are done. You've completed your first full import run of data from a source entity outside of ServiceNow to a target table inside of ServiceNow. The only thing I would recommend at this point is that we go and make sure that the data did in fact load into our target. So I'm going to go back into my custom table that I created as our target, u_my_data.list. Oops, typed something wrong. u_my_table. List. It won't work if you don't use the right name, and you can see now our custom table has been loaded with the 5 records that we requested. So perfect import run from the source all the way through the staging table, utilizing the transform map and associated field maps to map that data and load it into our target table, which is an existing table within ServiceNow. So nice work. Import complete. The only thing left to discuss is to wrap things up a bit on this series, and then I'm going to talk a bit about scheduling imports. Oftentimes, companies have data that's stored in some database within their network, perhaps, and it's not going away anytime soon. So you can imagine a scenario where you want to run this import on a scheduled, regular basis to update ServiceNow with maybe changes that have taken place in some legacy system or some table that you have within your network, or it could be an Excel spreadsheet. So you can actually schedule this import now to run on a regularly occurring basis, and we'll talk about that, and then we'll do a quick wrap up in the next note. So thank you all for joining this one, and I will see you in the next note.